My name is Margaret Blake, and the night my son stood beside his mother-in-law asking me to sign away my own house, I realized love can be turned into a weapon when greed pulls the trigger. Lydia, his mother-in-law, sat at my kitchen table with a smile as polished as her pearls papers spread out neatly between us. "It's just one more signature," she said sweetly. "You'll be saving him, Margaret." My hand hovered over the pen, but I didn't move. Daniel couldn't look me in the eye. His shoulders trembled like he was the child again caught in something bigger than himself. I smiled faintly and asked, "This signature, does it save him or ruin him?" The silence that followed was colder than the Indiana winter outside. Before that night, I never thought I'd live to question my own son's intentions. Daniel had always been my reason to keep going after my husband passed. We built our life on hard work, quiet Sundays, and a belief that honesty was the only wealth that mattered. I worked for the county library sorting returns and chatting with neighbors who'd known me for decades. The house, white siding, blue shutters, a front porch that creaked, wasn't just wood and nails. It was 30 years of sweat laughter and little moments that stitched a life together. When Daniel married Melissa, I thought I'd gained a daughter. She was polite, well-spoken, and always dressed a touch too fancy for our small Indiana town. But there was a stiffness about her, a careful way she spoke, as if she were always performing. Lydia, her mother, came to the wedding in a silk hat and talked to everyone like she was auditioning for a higher life. I remember thinking, this woman sees people as chess pieces. After the honeymoon, Lydia began showing up more often, always with advice. She'd bring coffee cake and tell me how lucky Daniel was to have a home like mine. But it must be such a burden for you alone. Her tone was sugary, but her eyes were sharp, calculating. Melissa would nod along. One evening, Lydia said, "Have you ever considered transferring the property early? It saves trouble later." I laughed it off, but something about that word transferring made my stomach tighten. Weeks turned into months. Daniel started talking about financial modernization words that didn't belong in his mouth. He worked as a handyman. He wasn't one for fancy talk. He'd come by less often, and when he did, he looked nervous. "Mom," he'd say, "Lydia just wants to help. She knows about this stuff." But Lydia didn't help. She positioned herself like a banker asking questions about my insurance, my will, my monthly bills. She said she was helping Daniel plan for the future. I knew something was wrong the night I found her in my living room when I came home from church. Lydia was sitting there with her reading glasses low on her nose, flipping through my property folder. "Just organizing," she said smoothly. "You have so many old papers here, dear." I smiled, the polite kind, the kind that hides fire. "I prefer my papers just the way they are," I told her. She closed the folder slowly, like someone putting away a loaded gun. That's when I started writing everything down, every visit, every comment. I dated them in a little notebook. My neighbor Nora, who'd worked as a paralegal before retirement, noticed my worry and said, "Margaret, don't sign anything without me looking at it first." Her words stuck in my head like a warning bell. Then Daniel came one evening with a tense smile. "Mom Lydia found a way to consolidate your taxes," he said. "She just needs your signature to help me avoid a penalty." He laid out some documents on the table. I saw my name in bold at the top. "Transfer of property deed." My breath caught. "This isn't about taxes," I said quietly. "It's my house." Daniel's face flushed red. "Mom, please. You're overreacting. It's just paperwork." Lydia smiled, that slow, careful smile from across the table. "She's doing this for you, Daniel," she said softly. "Don't make it harder for her." That's when I realized Lydia wasn't trying to save Daniel. She was trying to own him. And my house was the rope she'd used to pull him under. I didn't show my anger. Instead, I leaned back, folded my hands, and said, "I'll read it tomorrow." Lydia tilted her head. "There's no time, dear. It has to be done tonight." I stood up slowly. "Then it won't be done." She tried again, voice honey sweet. "Margaret, if you just sign here, you'll be saving your son." I looked straight at her, then at Daniel, and said, with a calmness that surprised even me, "This signature, does it save him? Or ruin him?" They both froze. Lydia's hand slipped from the papers. Daniel's lips trembled. The clock ticked in the silence, tick, tick, tick each second, carving a deeper line between us. I picked up the papers, folded them neatly, and said, "You can take these back. I won't be signing anything tonight." They left without another word. The porch light cast their shadows long across the yard, fading into the dark. When the door closed, I sat back at the table and let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. The quiet in that kitchen felt heavy, like betrayal had its own gravity. I knew then that this wasn't just a misunderstanding, it was a plan. And if they thought I'd hand over my life's work with one pen stroke, they'd soon learn that Margaret Blake wasn't built to surrender. The next morning, the coffee in my cup tasted bitter. It wasn't the brew, it was the memory of Lydia's perfume still lingering in the air. I sat at the kitchen table staring at the folded papers they'd left behind. Transfer of property deed. Those 4 words had stolen my sleep. Outside, frost was still clinging to the grass and the mailbox flag was down. I pulled on my sweater and went out to fetch the mail, half expecting another envelope from the law office Lydia mentioned. Sure enough, it was there, an envelope with her return address printed neatly on the corner. Inside, a single typed letter read, "Margaret, we just need your confirmation before proceeding. Please sign by Friday." I set it down beside my coffee and laughed quietly, not from humor, but disbelief. Friday. She was giving me a deadline to surrender my own house. That afternoon, I called my neighbor Nora, who'd been a paralegal for 30 years before retiring. "Bring everything over," she said. "We'll look at it together." Her house smelled of cinnamon and old paper. She spread the documents across her dining table, put on her glasses, and whistled low. "Honey, this isn't a cosign. It's a transfer deed. You sign this and it's gone. Your name off. Daniel's name on." I swallowed hard. But he said it was just about taxes. She looked up, frowning. "Lydia said that, didn't she? I know her type. Polished, controlling, the kind that hides greed under good manners." We went line by line through the papers. At the bottom, Lydia's signature was already there, dated and notarized. "That's illegal," Nora said. "She can't pre-notarize your name." Her words settled like stones in my stomach. That night, I couldn't rest. I walked from room to room, touching the things that held my life together. The framed photo of my husband on our wedding day. The quilt my mother stitched the rocking chair. Daniel used to fall asleep in. Everything in that house carried a heartbeat. I stood at the window, watching the empty street, and whispered, "Not yet. Not ever." The next day, I saw Daniel's truck parked at the hardware store. I hesitated before walking in. He was at the counter paying for paint. "Mom," he said awkwardly when he saw me, "did you get Lydia's letter?" "I did," I said. "And I got advice." He sighed. "Mom, please. You don't understand how much she's done for us." I stepped closer. "And what have you done for yourself, Daniel? When did you start letting other people speak for you?" For a moment, I saw my son again, The boy who fixed the porch steps with his father, who stayed up late helping me sort library donations. But then his jaw hardened, and Lydia's voice came out of him. "You're making this harder than it needs to be." I smiled gently. "Good. Maybe you'll remember that hard things have value." I turned and walked out before he could reply. That evening, Nora called. "I made some copies of your deed," she said. "We should talk to the county clerk." Quietly. So the next morning, we drove to the courthouse, a squat brick building that smelled of dust and old files. The clerk, Mrs. Harrow, was a kind woman I'd known for years. She looked through the records and frowned. "Well, isn't that something?" she murmured. "Someone already tried to file a pending transfer for this address last week." I felt the blood drain from my face. She turned the monitor slightly toward me. The name on the application, Daniel Blake and Lydia Benson, filed as pending review. Mrs. Harrow shook her head. "It's not valid without your original signature, thank God. But they sure were ready to move fast." Outside the courthouse, I stood in the cold wind, my breath fogging the air. Nora put her hand on my shoulder. "You know what to do, don't you?" "Yes," I said, "but this time, I'll do it my way." That night, Daniel called. "Mom, please don't make this a big deal," he said. "Lydia just wants to help keep the family stable." "Family," I repeated. Funny how that word gets used when someone wants what isn't theirs. "Don't be like this," he pleaded. "I'm in over my head. Lydia said if I don't fix this debt, we'll lose everything." I stayed quiet for a long moment, then said softly, "You won't lose everything, Daniel. Just one thing, and it's not the house." I hung up before he could answer. The following morning, I called a retired attorney in town, Mr. Callahan, a friend of my late husband's. I explained everything. He listened without interrupting, then said, "Margaret, you did right by not signing. But we'll make sure this doesn't come back to bite you. Bring me the papers. I'll take care of the rest." For the first time in weeks, I slept through the night. When I woke, the frost was gone and sunlight filled the kitchen. The papers were still there on the table, but now they felt harmless, like the ghosts of a battle I'd already decided how to win. I poured myself a cup of coffee, looked at the house around me, and whispered, "Let's see what they try next." Because I knew Lydia Benson wasn't done, and neither was I. A few days passed quiet but uneasy, like the air before a summer storm. Daniel didn't come by and I didn't call him. I kept busy at the library, shelving returned books, and pretending everything was fine. But inside, my thoughts kept circling back to that word on the paper, transfer. It wasn't just a document anymore, it was a wound. One Wednesday morning, as I was locking up the returns desk, Nora came by with 2 coffees. "You ready to play chess with that woman?" she asked, meaning Lydia. I smiled. I've never been better at it. At home that afternoon, I noticed a sleek black car pull up in front of my driveway. Lydia stepped out, wearing a beige coat and a matching smile. She didn't knock. She glided up the porch steps like she owned them. "Margaret," she began. I came to clear the air. I opened the door just wide enough to show manners, not warmth. "The air's fine where I stand." Her smile tightened. "There's no need to be unpleasant. Daniel's worried sick. He told me you've been talking to a lawyer." "I've been talking to my friends," I said. "Turns out they know a few things about property law." Lydia's eyes narrowed, but her tone stayed smooth. "You misunderstand. We're family, dear. We just want to make sure everything transitions properly. Think of it as security." I met her gaze and said, "Security for who?" For the first time, her words stumbled. "For Daniel, of course." "Good," I said softly. "Then he should be the one standing here, Not you. She tried to laugh it off, then turned toward her car. You'll regret letting pride get in the way, she said before leaving. I watched her drive off, the exhaust smoke curling into the cold Indiana air. That was the moment I decided this wouldn't just be about defense. I was going to turn their plan on its head. That evening, I invited Nora and Mr. Callahan, the retired attorney, over for pie and coffee. We spread Lydia's documents across the table. Mr. Callahan put on his glasses and tapped the pages. She tried to file without authorization. That's fraud, he said. If they attempt another filing, the county clerk will alert me directly. But if you want to teach them something, we can get creative. Creative? I asked, half smiling. He nodded. You can prepare a counter deed. It states that any transfer made under false representation reverts ownership back to you automatically. Completely legal if you notarize it properly. I leaned back. You mean I let them think I signed? He grinned. Exactly. Nora chuckled into her coffee. Oh, Margaret, that's cold and brilliant. The next day I visited the courthouse and filed my counter deed. Mrs. Harrow, the clerk, looked at me knowingly. You're playing this smart, she said. Women like Lydia always overplay their hand. When I got home, the phone was already ringing. Daniel. Mom, can we talk? He said nervously. Always, I replied. He came over an hour later. His hands were shaking as he sat at the kitchen table. I didn't mean to hurt you, he began. Lydia said if I didn't fix this loan, Melissa and I could lose everything. What loan? I asked gently. He hesitated. A business one. Lydia co-signed. But her house is under her ex-husband's name. She said, You had equity and... He trailed off, ashamed. I took a slow breath. So she needed my house to protect her mistake. He buried his face in his hands. I'm so sorry, Mom. For a moment, I wanted to reach out and comfort him like when he was 10 years old and scraped his knee. But this wasn't a scraped knee, it was betrayal disguised as love. Instead, I said, We'll handle this, Daniel, but I need you to let me do it my way. He nodded, looking relieved but confused. You'll sign then? I smiled faintly. Something like that. The next morning, Lydia called. I heard Daniel spoke to you, she said. We're all on the same page now, aren't we? Yes, I said evenly. Come by tonight. I'll have the papers ready. When I hung up, I placed my counter deed on the table, freshly notarized, and slid it into the same folder she'd given me. Then I baked a pie. If Lydia was going to play sweet, I could match her note for note. That evening, she arrived with Melissa in tow, both wearing coats that looked too expensive for our small-town dining room. Lydia smiled, the predator disguised as a guest. I'm glad we can settle this peacefully, she said. Peaceful sounds nice, I replied, slicing the pie. I handed her the folder. Everything you asked for. Signed. Her eyes gleamed as she flipped through the pages. I knew you'd come to your senses. Daniel walked in a few minutes later, his face pale but quiet. Mom, he whispered, you sure about this? I nodded. I'm sure. Lydia gathered the papers, smug and satisfied. I'll file them tomorrow morning, she said. Wonderful, I replied, handing her a slice of pie. Make sure you take it to the courthouse yourself. I wouldn't want anything to get lost in the mail. She laughed lightly, not catching the double meaning. Of course. After they left, Daniel lingered at the door. Mom, what did you do? Something every mother does, I said. I taught a lesson. He frowned, confused. I added softly, sometimes love isn't about saving someone from their mistakes. It's about letting them walk right into them. That night I called Mr. Callahan. It's done, I said. Good, he replied. When she files it, the county clerk will notify us immediately. Then we'll let her see what she really signed. I hung up feeling a calm I hadn't felt in months. The game was on, and for once I was ahead. Outside the porch, light flickered. I stood by the window watching the snow fall softly over the yard. My house looked peaceful again, like it knew justice was coming. 2 mornings later, I was sitting at the kitchen window sipping my coffee when the phone rang. The sunlight poured across the table, warming the same spot where those cursed papers had once sat. I picked up the phone and heard Lydia's voice, bright as ever. "Well, Margaret," she said, "I filed everything. The county clerk was quite helpful." I smiled into the receiver. I'm sure she was. "You'll sleep easier now knowing Daniel's debt is handled," Lydia continued. "I always sleep well when the truth's in writing," I said. There was a brief pause on her end, a flicker of uncertainty in her polished tone. "Of course," she replied, and then hung up. I poured myself another cup of coffee and exhaled slowly. It was time to wait. By noon, the courthouse called. Mrs. Harrow's voice was calm, but amused. "Margaret," she said, "I thought you'd want to know your daughter-in-law's mother just tried to record a property transfer. But the document she brought, well, it transferred ownership right back to you." I smiled so wide my cheeks hurt. "So it worked." "Beautifully," she said. Mr. Callahan's wording was airtight. When she reads that clause, her head's going to spin. I thanked her and hung up, feeling something warm rise in my chest, not anger, not revenge, but relief. The kind that comes when you've stood your ground and won without shouting. That evening, Daniel came over. He didn't call first. I found him standing in the doorway, hat in hand, like a boy who'd broken a window. "She's furious," he said quietly. "She said you tricked her." "Did I asked. He hesitated, then shook his head. "No, she tricked herself." We sat in the living room, the clock ticking between us. "Mom, I didn't mean for it to go this far," he said. "Lydia told me this would just fix things temporarily. She said you'd understand." I looked at him and saw the man my husband and I had raised, the good heart buried under years of guilt and bad guidance. "Daniel," I said gently, "you don't fix a mistake by making another one. You fix it by telling the truth." He nodded, his eyes glistening. "I know." We sat there for a long time in the kind of silence that hurts but heals. I wanted to reach out, but I also wanted him to sit in that truth a little longer. Some lessons are only learned through quiet. 2 days later, a letter arrived. Lydia's handwriting was stiff, her words polite but sharp. "You've humiliated me, and I hope you're proud. We were only trying to help your son. You've proven you care more about property than people." I folded the letter carefully and placed it in my drawer. She was wrong, but I didn't need to correct her. Some people never understand that a home isn't just about ownership, it's about roots. Later that week, I went grocery shopping and ran into Melissa by the canned goods aisle. She looked thinner, pale, her confidence cracked. "Margaret," she said softly, "I didn't know everything Lydia was doing. I swear." I looked at her for a long moment. "Maybe not," I said, "but you knew enough to stay quiet." She looked down, ashamed. "Daniel's been trying to fix things," she whispered. "He told her he's done taking her advice." I nodded. "That's a start." Then I added, "You both have a lot of rebuilding to do. I hope you start with honesty." Melissa's eyes filled with tears. "I don't blame you for hating her." "I don't hate her," I said, reaching for my basket. "I just don't invite her in." When I got home, the phone rang again. This time it was Mr. Callahan. "News travels fast," he said with a chuckle. "Apparently Lydia's threatening to sue you." "She can try," I replied. "She won't," he said. "She's too proud to let the world know she signed her own defeat." We both laughed. It wasn't cruel laughter. It was the sound of victory earned quietly, without fanfare. That night, Daniel came by again. He looked exhausted but calmer. He handed me a manila envelope. "Her loan papers," he said. "It's all here. I'm taking responsibility. Melissa and I will figure it out. I opened the envelope and saw Lydia's signature rows of debt numbers and payment schedules. You'll manage, I said softly. Just remember, you can rebuild money. But you can't rebuild trust unless you're honest. He nodded his shoulders, easing for the first time in months. I know, Mom. I really do. After he left, I stood at the window watching his truck disappear down Maple Street. The snow had begun to fall again, soft and slow. The porch light glowed against the flakes, and for the first time, my house felt safe again, not just because the papers said so, but because I did. A few days later, Nora stopped by with pie. Heard the storm's over, she said, grinning. For now, I said, smiling back, but even storms have a way of cleaning the air. She laughed, setting the pie down. You taught them a lesson, Margaret, and you didn't even have to raise your voice. Sometimes quiet is louder than shouting, I said. You just have to wait for the echo. We shared coffee pie and the kind of peace that comes only after standing your ground. That night, as I locked up and turned off the porch light, I thought of my husband again. I could almost hear his voice saying, "Don't let anyone take what we built." I smiled and whispered, "I didn't." Then I shut the door and let the house rest in silence, knowing it was finally truly mine again. The days that followed felt different. Lighter somehow, but not without a lingering ache. Winning doesn't erase the hurt that got you there. The house was quiet again, just the ticking clock and the hum of the refrigerator. I went about my days as usual. Coffee at 7, library by 9, home by 5. But even routine has a way of feeling changed once you've fought to protect it. Every time I walked past the kitchen table, I caught myself glancing at that spot where Lydia's papers once sat. I'd cleaned the surface twice, yet a faint crease remained in the wood grain, like a scar, a reminder. I traced it once with my fingertip and whispered, "Lesson learned." About a week later, Nora called. "You might want to sit down for this," she said. "Lydia's house went up for sale this morning." I paused, mid-breath. For sale, yep. Word is she's moving in with her sister in Carmel. Apparently, her ex-husband reclaimed the house in that messy divorce of hers. Seems like she ran out of safety nets. I didn't gloat, not even inwardly. There's no joy in watching a person fall from a ladder they built for themselves. Still, I couldn't help feeling something close to closure. Lydia's game had ended not with shouting or police or revenge, but with the quiet weight of consequences. That afternoon, Daniel stopped by again, this time with groceries. "Thought I'd help out," he said sheepishly. He looked different, less polished, more real. His jacket was worn, his hair a little too long, but his eyes were softer. "Melissa's staying with her mom for a bit," he added. "We're figuring things out." I took the bag from his hands. "You don't have to fix everything overnight," I said. "Sometimes fixing means sitting with the mess long enough to understand it." He nodded. "I've been doing a lot of sitting." He looked around the kitchen, his eyes landing on the photo of his father. "Dad would have told me I was a fool." I smiled. He'd have used stronger words than that. We both laughed quietly but genuinely. It felt good to hear that sound in this house again. Over the next few days, Daniel started helping with little things, patching a leaky gutter, mowing the lawn, even repainting the porch steps he used to play on as a kid. It wasn't about fixing the house, it was about fixing what had cracked between us. Sometimes he'd bring coffee and just sit the way we used to when life felt simpler. Then one afternoon, a letter arrived from a law office in Indianapolis. It was addressed to Margaret Blake with Lydia's name listed as the sender. I hesitated before opening it, expecting one last swing of her pride. Inside, though, was a single-page note. "Margaret, you were right to protect what's yours. I let anger and fear turn turn me into someone I barely recognize. I hope someday you'll forgive me for involving Daniel. Take care of your son. I won't trouble you again. Lydia. I read it twice. The words felt unfamiliar, almost human. For a long time, I just stared at the paper, wondering if regret had finally found her. I set it in the same drawer where I'd kept her first letter, the one filled with blame. Maybe one day I thought those 2 pages could sit side by side, one born of arrogance, the other of understanding. That night, Daniel and I had dinner on the porch. The sky was turning the color of copper as the sun slipped behind the trees. Melissa called, he said quietly. She wants to come by and apologize. Do you want her to? I asked. He sighed. Part of me does. Part of me doesn't know if it matters anymore. It matters, I said. Not for her, but for you. You can't carry shame forever, it gets too heavy. He nodded. You always make it sound simple. It's not simple, I replied. It's just clear. When he left that night, I stood on the porch long after his truck disappeared down the road. The air was cool, the kind that carries memories instead of words. I thought about everything that had happened, the lies, the papers, the silence between us. It wasn't just about a house. It was about being seen as someone who still mattered, even after age and loss had tried to make me invisible. The next morning, I received a call from the county clerk again. Just thought you'd like to know, she said, the title for your property has officially been re-verified and sealed. You're the sole owner, no pending claims. I thanked her, but when I hung up, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt steady, grounded, as if the earth under my feet had finally stopped shaking. That weekend, Nora came by with a pie again. You look lighter, she said. Setting it down. I feel lighter, I replied. Like something heavy finally left the room. She grinned. Maybe it wore pearls. We laughed until we cried. Later that evening, I sat on the porch with a blanket over my knees, watching the lights flicker on down the street. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked, and a train whistle blew a sound that had always reminded me of moving forward. I whispered to myself, justice doesn't need noise, it just needs patience. And for the first time in months, I closed my eyes and felt peace without fear that someone was plotting behind my back. The house, the silence, and the evening breeze, all of it, belonged again to the woman who'd earned it. A week later, the first snow of the season fell over Bloomington. The town looked quiet under a blanket of white, as if it too needed rest after months of tension. I sat by the window with a cup of cocoa, watching flakes settle on the railing Daniel had just repainted. The air smelled like pine and forgiveness. Daniel came by that afternoon with a small box in his hands. For you, he said shyly, setting it on the table. Inside was a new brass house number plate, clean polished engraved with Blake Home, since 1992. I ran my fingers over the letters, feeling a lump rise in my throat. You didn't have to, I said softly. I wanted to, he replied. You've always said a home should tell the truth about who lives inside it. I think this one finally does. We shared a quiet moment before he added, Melissa called again. She's staying with her sister now. Lydia's gone. Moved out of state. Where to, I asked. Florida, he said. She sold what she had left, said she needed a new start. People like her always do, I murmured. But the past has a way of following, no matter how far they move. He nodded. She wanted me to tell you she's sorry. I looked out the window. That's something. But forgiveness isn't a message, it's a process. He smiled faintly. Then I guess we both have work to do. The rest of that day passed quietly. I made roast chicken the way Daniel liked it as a boy, and we ate without the usual wait between us. When he left that evening, I felt something unclench in my chest. It wasn't full forgiveness yet, but it was the road leading there. A few days later, Nora stopped by with news from the clerk's office. "They're running property fraud awareness seminars now," she said. "Your story made the rounds in a good way. People are talking about how you handled it." I blinked in surprise. I didn't mean for it to become a story. Nora smiled. "That's the best kind, the quiet ones that help other people." Later that week, I was shelving books at the library when a woman around my age approached me. She held a small stack of paperwork. "You don't know me," she said, "but I heard about what happened with your son and that deed transfer mess. My niece almost got tricked into something similar. Your name came up at church." I froze for a moment, then smiled. "Well, I'm glad it helped her." She squeezed my hand. "It did. You probably saved her house." When she left, I leaned against the counter, overwhelmed by a quiet gratitude. It's strange how your private pain can become someone else's guidepost. That evening, Daniel came over again. This time he brought groceries and dessert. "I wanted to help with dinner," he said, rolling up his sleeves, no strings attached. I laughed softly. "Good. I'm all out of pens for signing things anyway." He chuckled. "Fair enough." As we cooked, he told me about his plans. "I've been thinking of starting over," he said. "A smaller business this time, just me and a couple of local guys. No investors, no loans. I don't need big. I just need honest." "That sounds right," I said. "Big can be overrated." When dinner was done, we sat on the porch plates in our laps, the smell of roasted potatoes in the air. The snow had stopped leaving the world shining under the streetlight. "I don't think I ever thanked you," Daniel said suddenly. "For what?" "For saving me from making the worst mistake of my life." I shook my head. "No, Daniel. I just made sure you could see it before it ruined you. You did the saving yourself." He looked down. "I don't deserve this house." "Maybe not yet," I said gently. "But you're learning. That's a start." We sat there for a long while, listening to the faint whistle of a passing train. It reminded me of my husband again, of the nights we'd sit in that same spot with mugs of tea talking about Daniel's future. He'd always said, "You can build a life on love, but only if it's honest." I smiled at the memory. Daniel noticed. "What's on your mind, your father?" I said softly. "He'd be proud you came home." He nodded, eyes shining. "I hope so." The next morning, I woke to find a small envelope slid under my door. Daniel's handwriting on the front read, "For Mom." Inside was a handwritten note and a check for a modest sum money from the sale of his truck. The note said, "This isn't payment. It's a promise. I'll earn back what trust I lost one step at a time." I folded the letter and placed it next to my husband's old note in the lockbox, the one that said, "Don't let anyone take what we built." The two messages, one from the past, one from the present, sat side by side like bookends. One reminded me to stand firm. The other reminded me to forgive. That afternoon, I planted a new rosebush in the front yard where the old mailbox used to stand. The soil was cold, my fingers numb, but it felt right, something new growing from the same ground that had almost been taken. When the first bloom finally opened weeks later, its petals were deep red against the white snow. I stood there with my gloves still dirty and whispered, "We're home." Winter eventually gave way to spring, and with it came a kind of peace I hadn't felt in years. The thaw brought the smell of damp earth and lilacs, and for the first time since my husband died, I started leaving the curtains open again. The house didn't feel like a fortress anymore. It felt alive. Daniel began visiting more regularly, not out of guilt now, but out of habit. Some mornings, he'd bring coffee and just sit quietly on the porch while I read the paper. Other times he'd come by after work covered in sawdust and smelling faintly of cedar, talking about the small jobs he'd picked up around town. He'd started his own handyman business again, just him and two old friends from high school. No big investors, no shortcuts, he said proudly. Just work I can be proud of. I smiled every time he said that. He was finding his way back to himself. One Sunday after church, he brought Melissa. I hadn't seen her since everything fell apart. She stood on the porch holding a bouquet of tulips. Her eyes red-rimmed but sincere. "Mrs. Blake," she said softly. "May I come in?" I studied her face. She looked older, not in years, but in humility. I stepped aside. "Come in, Melissa." We sat in the kitchen, the same spot where so much had gone wrong. She set the flowers on the table and said, "I owe you more than an apology. Lydia made me believe we were helping Daniel. I didn't question it, because I didn't want to see the truth." Her hands trembled slightly as she spoke. "I grew up watching her control everyone. I thought that was love. But it wasn't." I nodded slowly. We all learn what love isn't before we understand what it is. She looked at me, tears welling up. "I know I can't undo what happened, but I hope one day you'll forgive me." I reached across the table and placed my hand over hers. "Forgiveness isn't a gift we give others," I said. "It's something we give ourselves. You can start today." She wiped her eyes. "Thank you. I don't deserve your kindness." "Then earn it," I said gently. Daniel joined us a moment later carrying coffee. We talked for hours, not about the past, but about small things. The weather, the church bazaar, a new diner opening by the old post office. Normal things. And somehow, normal felt like the biggest blessing of all. As the days grew longer, I found joy in the quiet again. I planted vegetables in the backyard, pruned the roses, and even fixed the squeaky porch swing. Every repair felt symbolic, like I was restoring not just the house, but the heart that kept it together. One evening, I sat outside watching the sun melt into the horizon when Nora walked over with a little smirk. "You know," she said, "half the town's talking about how you outsmarted that Lydia woman. You've become something of a legend." I laughed. "A legend. At my age," she shrugged. "Hey, legends come in all forms. Some wear pearls, others wield pens." We both laughed until the porch light flicked on automatically. The golden glow wrapped around us, soft and familiar. Later that night, I sat down with my husband's old notebook, the one I hadn't touched in years. The cover was cracked, the pages yellowed. I flipped through the notes he'd written about our house repairs. Family budgets, dreams for retirement that never came. On the last page, I wrote something new. Revenge isn't about hurting someone back. It's about protecting what's good even when others try to take it. The next morning, Daniel stopped by with a suggestion. "Mom, I was thinking, you should write down everything that happened. People could learn from it." I smiled. "You sound like Nora." He grinned. "She's been saying the same thing. Maybe she's right." So I did. I started with the day Lydia came to my kitchen with that fake smile and those real papers. I wrote it all, the lies, the trap, the lesson. By the time I finished, the notebook was half full, and my hands ached. But my heart didn't. It felt lighter. Weeks later, the church asked if I'd share my story at their senior luncheon. Not the legal parts, the pastor said with a wink, just the wisdom. So I stood at the podium looking at the faces of people I'd known for decades, neighbors, widows, retired teachers, farmers. All of them had stories too. I told mine simply how trust can be broken, how love can be twisted, and how silence, when used right, can be the loudest kind of justice. When I finished, they applauded not the polite kind, but the real warm kind that feels like understanding. Afterward, an older man approached me. "My daughter tried to get me to sign over my land last year," he said quietly. "I almost did. Hearing your story made me glad I didn't." I squeezed his hand. It's never too late to stand your ground. That night I came home to my quiet house and felt the kind of peace that doesn't need explaining. I sat on the porch watching the moon rise over the fields. Somewhere in the distance, I could hear Daniel's truck heading home. I whispered into the night, "You did good, kid." Then I looked at the stars and added softly, "We did good." When I went back inside, I turned off the porch light just once to let the darkness remind me how far I'd come. And when I closed my eyes, I knew the story was done. Not just the revenge, but the lesson that strength doesn't come from anger. It comes from knowing when to let go. If you're listening to this and you've been hurt, betrayed, or underestimated, remember this. You're not too old, too kind, or too late to take back your life. Protect what you've built. Guard your peace. And never ever sign away what's sacred.